I think in the past we are quite used to speak our mind very freely. We don't have to worry what is would be considered unlawful in classroom, both at school level or university level. So when academics try to conduct their research, or teachers talking about anything about the subjects, or even the students, if they are going to work on their assignment or thesis, I don't think any one of us would be afraid of crossing the so-called red line. So there was no such worry at all. But nowadays, I think people will have in mind there are something forbidden, or then if we cross that line, that might lead to some troubles. It can be very big trouble according to the National Security Law. So this is a big change, and most of the things about what is going to be forbidden is unclear, and this ambiguity would actually lead to the kind of self-censorship. So try to avoid troubles. So the sphere of freedom would be limited, and I think that is a major threat to our education system. Separation of power is a political science concept. It is based on this concept. We have separation of judiciary, administration, and also legislature. So three of them will check and balance. So that is how a modern government built on. And I think that this concept, when it comes to Kin-yuen, the Secretary of Education, so he tries to say that this did not exist in Hong Kong, and it will not exist in Hong Kong. And I don't think that any concept like this should be defined by politicians or government officials. It should be debated among academics. So when we talk about separation of powers, we have different interpretation. We can discuss whether this applies to Hong Kong or not. We can actually have a very lively discussion on that. We can organize debates. We can put up such statement, and then we can invite students to comment on it based on what you have learned about political science. So I think we should not allow this kind of political screening to confine the sphere of freedom of thinking, freedom of expression, freedom of expression. If the students say that there is separation of power, obviously there is, they should be allowed to talk about it freely in the classroom, in the public. And it should, academics, teachers, journalists, anyone in the society should be able to talk about it freely, without any constraints. You can say that this might be, you can discuss, some would think that this does not apply to Hong Kong, and some others would argue the other way. So I think it's free to argue in whatever way you believe. So that is how we can improve in the world of education, in the world of knowledge. Well, to some extent, yes, because she herself is trying to politicize the whole thing. And I think for the education sector, what we try to nurture students is, we allow them to know exactly what about basic knowledge of anything, and then we want to introduce to them different perspective, different viewpoints, so that they can make their own judgment. So at the end, we treasure independent thinking and independent judgment. So this is what we want our students to be, and so we do not want them to be imposed of certain political beliefs or some kind of ideology. So, but I think the government seems to be quite interested to impose something. For example, we just talked about the separation of power. They try to forbid people to talk about it. That is very politicized, and I don't agree with that kind of intervention from the government into our education. Politics is part of our daily life. You cannot avoid that. Yes. So in our education, we should learn about our lives, of course. So politics should be part of the substance that we would like our students to learn about. And with formal education, we will be able to bring about a proper understanding of political life. And also they will be able to understand different perspectives, learn about how to respect different ideas, etc. So that is very important. So we should not avoid politics in education. What we need to avoid is political indoctrination. We don't want the government or even the teachers to impose a certain ideology or political beliefs into all students. So we should try to avoid that kind of imposing. And also we would try to avoid political intervention into the school management. For example, what we witness nowadays is if teachers say something about the police on the Facebook, they will get themselves into trouble because there are certain complaints going to the Education Bureau, and surprisingly the Education Bureau treat this kind of complaints very, very seriously. And that is quite different from other complaints. So this kind of complaints will bring about a lot of troubles to the teachers. By so doing, that is actually a political process, a political operation that would cause teachers to feel being threatened. So I think this kind of political process we obviously would like to avoid. We don't want this kind of negative political process in schools. Firstly, we have to define what the problem is. It seems that is it People Daily?
China Daily.
The China Daily, okay. China Daily. It seems that China Daily look at the protest, so they says this is the problem. Okay, and this may be the problem. protest will involve a lot of inconvenience in the society, so that can be a problem. But we have to trace deeper into the origin. Where does this problem come from? The protesters, they have a lot of choices. They can stay at home. They can go to enjoy swimming, picnic, or go to have meal with friends. They can find some good time on the computer, on the web. So why so many people of them go outside to participate in the protest? We have to ask this question. And actually, not only young people are involved in these protests. People of different ages participate in this kind of protest for the whole of the last year. So we should not only look at part of it. We have to look into the broader picture. The broader picture, of course, the protests are the reaction of what the government has done in the past year, including the introduction of the extradition bill that was going against the will of the public. The protests are also dealing with reaction against the police brutality to the people. So if there is no extradition bill, if there was no police brutality, I don't think any one of the young people would sacrifice their own nice time with their friends, with a computer or at home to go to outside to the street. So they have to look at the root cause. So and the government should also have deep reflection of what they have done. And if they do not try to correct themselves, there is no way to solve the problem. Yes, of course, if the money were being cut, I think it will seriously affect the quality of teaching, education, and also research in Hong Kong. So that's why we, the Democrats in the Legislative Council, opposed not to approve these expenditure last year. So eventually, those plans was approved by the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council. So I think even the pro-establishment people themselves understand that not approving these expenditure will only arouse the discontent of the people, of the general public against themselves. So at last they changed their attitude. So the expenditure were actually approved eventually. Yes, my concern is actually it's quite difficult to teach national security law for the time being because there is a lot of ambiguity in the law. Firstly, Hong Kong people were not allowed to participate in the preparation of the law. We were not informed. We have no chance to express our ideas formally, except a few selected people in the, for example, the National People's Congress representatives, the so-called representatives. Apart from that, most of the people, including the teachers, we're not involved. So not involved in the preparation of the law implies that we did not have the chance to deliberate very in-depth into the law. So in ordinary legislation in Hong Kong, all of them has to go through a very rigorous procedure in the Legislative Council, and every single article is being discussed, debated, and maybe, if necessary, they will be amended in the Legislative Council. And all these are made public, so we can understand why this article is written in such a way, why this word is being used. But for the National People's Congress and for this national security law, we did not have that kind of opportunity. So actually, when it come out, the whole legislation, why is it written in this way? For example, why the chief executive has the power to appoint the judge to the national security laws related cases. There is no explanation at all. So up to now, we don't know why. Or I should say, maybe we know why, but we do not have the justification at all. So without that kind of justification, when it comes to a teacher who is going to explain to the students why the law, what is this law? Yes, I think we can tell people, we can tell the students what the factual things is easier. But when we come to interpretation, when we come to justification, I'm not sure, is there one particular teacher who can, who would claim himself or herself very capable in delivering that knowledge? So I really concerned about, for example, when the so-called red line is not clear. One example is the slogan of 光復香港時代革命 was being considered as related or seeking Hong Kong independence, and was claimed to be unlawful by the police. So is there any other slogans or sentence should also be considered to be violating the law? I don't think there is any one of us in this room or in Hong Kong is able to say, and so I really concerned about if we are putting the national security law in school and we try to teach it. Is it easy? Is it possible to pass to our next generation the so-called correct interpretation of the law? I think actually most of the young people nowadays are very concerned about Hong Kong, because I think many of the young people are not satisfied with the current trend. Now it seems that Hong Kong is losing its merits, and also some of the core values among the Hong Kong community is fading. So many young people are now very, very concerned. I would say that if fewer young people are concerned about the current trend, might be a good thing, because if the society itself is nothing wrong, actually we will tend to enjoy our life. We don't have to spend so much time to talk about political things. We don't have to come out for protest. We come out for protest because the society is sick. There's something wrong. So I think most of the young people are now very concerned. This is a very natural response to what's happening in Hong Kong nowadays. But I hope that we can overcome this situation, and eventually we can spend some of our time for other things. Actually, I think for young people should have a lot of things to explore. Explore life, explore arts, explore science, knowledge. So there are a lot of things that we and even friendship. I think these are very important. But nowadays, I think many of us have to spend most of the energy and time on political things. This is actually not a good thing, but we have to do it because we have no choice, because it is a very extraordinary time. Well, I will not choose to speak in the capacity of the ex-Democratic Party, because I don't think my views has any connection with Democratic Party for the time being. So I would say that I would like to talk about or I would like to answer your question from the perspective of a participating observer in the Legislative Council for the past few years. I think you are right that we have different Legislative Council members adopting different approaches in their participation in the Council. Some are more radical, some would use more direct physical action, while the others are more moderate, or they would they would be more they tend to be like traditional legislature. For example, if you go to the Parliament in UK, probably you won't find any physical or action like that in Hong Kong. And if anything like that happened, you would be considered by the UK public as you are very strange, and why do you adopt this kind of approach? So that you'll be questioned. But in Hong Kong, I think the situation we can understand that because the system itself is not a very fair representation of public opinion. The pro-establishment, although it's not supported by the majority of Hong Kong people, but they occupy the majority of seats in the council. So that is unfair. On the other hand, the Democrats, of course, we get the support by the majority of the people in terms of if you count the number of votes. But we can only occupy the minority of the seats. So if we are trying to discuss something, and finally we come to voting, we are always in an inferior situation, very disadvantageous. So that is one thing. The second thing is that if the government is turning into, I would say that the government was used to be quite rational, quite to be, they tend to be open and treat people, no matter you come from pro-establishment or democratic camp, they will respect your opinions. Or is not talking rationally, so there are certain political agenda that, and they tend to treat certain part of the society in a very unrespectful way. Of course, I mean the democratic camp. So this would upset many people who hope that we can discuss in a very orderly way and to come up with constructive solutions. And if the government is adopting this kind of approach, if there is no fairness in the representation of the or in the composition of the council, some people would tend to adopt a radical way to. I think this is quite understandable. But the nature of a legislature require people to discuss, debate, and vote in a very peaceful way, in a very orderly way. So the nature of a legislature has some conflicts with this kind of physical action approach. So I will not say that which is correct, which is wrong. I would think the system itself is the origin of the problem, and I think different people are trying their own way to fix it. But I think the system itself, we really have to deal with that root cause. If that root cause is not resolved, it's difficult to solve the problem. So I think it's a very difficult one. I do not have a ultimate answer for you, but I hope that I can explain that there is some complexity. I hope we can safeguard the core values, freedom and rule of law. I think freedom of speech, freedom in our academic studies, freedom of teaching, freedom of learning is very important. And on that basis, I hope we'll gradually get into full democracy in one day. Of course, that is quite far away now. It seems to be quite far away now. But I think we have to stand firm, and we hope that one day we'll be able to get closer or arrive there eventually.
As we're nearing the end of this interview, I would like to thank Mr. Ip for giving us an insight to his opinion on the current impact of the national security law